No.
He needs medical attention.
The hospital corridor lights flicker under the weight of midnight. A 2-month-old baby is screaming. Not crying, screaming. The kind of sound that makes nurses freeze mid-step, and doctors exchange worried glances. They think no one notices. In the private suite at the end of the hall, Ye-jun sits with his elbows on his knees, his tailored suit jacket long discarded, his tie loosened like a man trying to breathe through something invisible. His eyes are red. Not from anger, from exhaustion, from 3 days without sleep. He is the most feared man in Seoul. Men twice his size lower their eyes when he walks into a room. Entire organizations rearrange themselves around his silence. But right now, none of that matters, because the only thing in front of him is a tiny, screaming infant who will not stop crying, and a wife who is never coming back to hold him. 5 doctors have tried, 2 senior nurses, a specialist flown in from Busan. Nothing works. "Sir," one nurse says carefully, "maybe if we just—" No, his voice doesn't rise. It doesn't need to. No one else touches him. Because the truth sitting underneath his silence is this. His wife died bringing this child into the world, while he was 3,000 miles away closing a deal that, in this moment, feels like it cost him everything. He remembers the exact phone call. The doctor's voice, careful and clinical, trying to soften words that could not be softened. Complications, hemorrhage. We did everything we could. He remembers the flight home. 11 hours of staring at a seatback screen without seeing it, rehearsing apologies to a woman who would never hear them. He remembers walking into the hospital and being handed a son instead of a wife, a trade he never agreed to and cannot undo. Since that day, he has not slept in his own bed. He has not returned to his office. He has sat in this hospital wing for 3 days straight, cycling through specialists like a man trying to buy back time he already lost once. He will not let anyone else raise his son, even if it kills him too. The machines around the room hum their indifferent rhythm. Outside the window, Seoul's skyline glitters on, oblivious to the small catastrophe unfolding on the 9th floor of one of its finest hospitals. A junior nurse in the hallway mutters to a colleague that they should call security if he refuses one more specialist. The colleague hushes her immediately. Everyone on this floor knows exactly whose son is crying behind that door, and no one wants to be the one who suggests removing him from it. And then the door opens. A different nurse walks in, dark skin, tired eyes, a quiet kind of calm that doesn't belong in a room this loud. She's not on this floor's rotation. She shouldn't even be here. But she recognizes the cry. She recognizes the baby. And for the first time in 3 days, Ye-jun looks up, not with hope, because he's forgotten what that feels like, but with something close to it. She steps closer. "May I try?" Before we continue, welcome to Afro-K Stories with B. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now, because trust me, you do not want to miss where this story goes. And drop a comment below telling me, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Now, let's get back to that hospital room. Ye-jun doesn't answer right away. His eyes move over her face, searching for something he can't name. Recognition, maybe, or the faint memory of a voice he heard once through the haze of his wife's final hours. He remembers now. This woman was there. She was one of the nurses in the delivery room the night his wife slipped away, and his son slipped into the world in almost the same breath. He should say no. Every instinct built over years of controlling every variable in his life tells him to say no, but he is too tired to fight his own exhaustion anymore, and something about the calm in her eyes makes the refusal die in his throat. He nods once. She crosses the room slowly, unhurried, as if the chaos around her doesn't exist. The head doctor opens his mouth to object, but one look from Ye-jun silences him instantly. She reaches the crib and gently lifts the crying infant into her arms, cradling his head, the way someone does when they've done it 1,000 times before, not out of training, but out of instinct. The baby keeps screaming. For a moment, nothing changes, and the room seems to hold its breath in unison, waiting to see if this too will fail like everything before it. Then she begins to hum. It's soft at first, barely audible over the crying, an old lullaby in a language none of the Korean staff recognize, something warm and foreign and strangely soothing. She sways gently side to side, her voice low, steady, unwavering. The baby hiccups, then quiets, then, impossibly, stops crying altogether. The silence that follows is almost louder than the screaming was. Nurses who have been running on adrenaline for 72 hours stand frozen in the doorway. The specialist from Busan lowers his clipboard, speechless. And Ye-jun, the man who has not shed a tear since his wife's funeral, the man who has built an empire on never showing weakness, feels his throat tighten as he watches his son finally rest in someone's arms. He doesn't move for a long moment. He simply watches her rock his son gently, humming that same lullaby, and something in his chest that has been clenched shut for days begins, just slightly, to loosen. "How?" he finally asks, voice hoarse. "Did you do that?" She looks up at him, and for the first time, he notices how young she actually looks beneath the exhaustion in her own eyes. "I sang this to him the night he was born," she says quietly, "while your wife was—" She stops herself, unsure if she's allowed to finish that sentence in front of him. "Say it," he says, "please." "While your wife was holding him for the first and only time," she finishes softly. I don't think he forgot the sound. Babies remember more than people think. Ye-jun looks down at his son, finally asleep, finally still, and for a moment he can't speak at all. When he finds his voice again, it isn't the voice of a mafia boss issuing commands. It's the voice of a father, raw and unguarded. "Stay," he says, "please. Be his caregiver. I'll pay you whatever you want. Just don't let him cry like that again." She hesitates, glancing down at the sleeping infant in her arms before looking back up at him. "I can't," she says gently. "I already have a job here. I'm a nurse on this floor. I have responsibilities. Patients who need me. I'll speak to the hospital director. I'll compensate them for your absence, whatever it takes. It's not about money, sir." Her voice is calm but firm, the voice of someone used to standing her ground gently rather than loudly. "I'm still paying off my nursing school loans. This job is how I do that. I can't just leave it." Something shifts behind Ye-jun's eyes, a calculation, quiet and quick. "How much do you owe?" She stiffens slightly. "I don't need charity." "I'm not offering charity." His tone sharpens just slightly, back into the voice of a man used to negotiating. "Consider it an employment contract. You raise my son. I clear your debt as part of your compensation. That is not charity. That is a job, with terms, like any other." She studies him for a long moment, searching his face the way he had searched hers minutes earlier. There's no cruelty in his eyes, only a kind of desperate, quiet plea disguised as business logic. Finally, she nods. "All right," she says, "I'll do it." Ye-jun feels something in his chest release for the second time that night. He looks down at his sleeping son, then back at the woman now holding his future in her arms. And for the first time since the funeral, he allows himself to believe that maybe, somehow, things will be all right. Neither of them knows yet how much that single decision will change everything. Patricia arrives at the Yi mansion 3 days later with a single suitcase and a folder of medical documents Ye-jun insisted she bring, even though he had already told her the debt would be cleared by the end of the week. She stands at the base of the enormous marble staircase, staring up at chandeliers the size of small cars, and wonders quietly what she has just agreed to. The staff do not welcome her. They watch her from doorways and hallway corners. Whispering in Korean, they assume she doesn't understand. A foreign nurse, hired overnight, given a room on the family wing instead of the staff quarters. To them, it doesn't add up, and the ones who can't make sense of something usually decide to distrust it instead. The head housekeeper, a stern woman named Madame Han, walks Patricia to her room without a single word of welcome. She opens the door, gestures inside, and says only, "The young master's room is at the end of the hall. Feeding schedule is on the counter. Don't touch anything that isn't yours." Patricia nods and says nothing back. She has learned, over years of being underestimated in rooms far less intimidating than this one, that silence is sometimes the strongest response available. Her first few days at the mansion are quiet in the way a held breath is quiet. She eats her meals alone in the small sitting room off the kitchen, because none of the staff invite her to join them at the long table where they take their breaks. She learns the layout of the estate the way she once learned hospital floor plans, memorizing exits and staircases, and the particular creak of the third step near the nursery, not out of any expectation she'll need to know these things, simply because that is how her mind has always worked. She overhears two of the younger maids talking in the hallway one afternoon, their voices dropping the moment they realize she's within earshot, though not quite quickly enough. "She's not even Korean," one of them murmurs. "Why would he trust a stranger with the young master?" The other one shrugs. "Money, probably. Rich men do strange things when they're grieving." Patricia keeps walking, her expression unchanged, though the words settle somewhere in her chest and stay there. Only Madame Han seems to watch her with something other than open suspicion, a wary, assessing patience, the look of a woman who has seen enough temporary hires come and go through this house to know that judgment should wait for proof rather than assumption. That night, she hears the baby crying again. Not the desperate screaming from the hospital, but a smaller, uncertain whimper. She finds her way to the nursery without needing directions, some instinct pulling her straight there, and finds Ye-jun standing over the crib in the dark, still in his dress shirt, looking utterly lost. "I don't know what he wants," he admits quietly, not turning around. "The nanny before you." He stops. "There was someone before me?" "She left after 4 days." He finally turns to face her, and in the dim nursery light, he looks less like the man feared across Seoul's underworld, and more like any exhausted new father anywhere in the world. "She said he cried too much, that it wasn't worth the money." Patricia steps past him and lifts the baby gently, checking his forehead, his diaper, the room temperature, running through the quiet checklist she's built over years of nursing. "He's not hungry," she murmurs. "He's not sick. He's just scared of the dark in a room this big." She carries him to the window and points out at the distant lights of the city. "See that? Nothing's going to get you in here. Nothing at all." The baby quiets, watching the lights, and slowly drifts back to sleep in her arms. Ye-jun watches the whole exchange in silence, something unreadable moving across his face. "You're good at this," he finally says. "I've had practice." She lays the baby down gently. "You will too. Nobody is born knowing how to be a parent, sir. Not even you." He doesn't respond to that, but something about the way he looks at her afterward tells her the words landed somewhere. Over the following weeks, Patricia teaches him things no bodyguard or business partner ever could. How to test the bathwater with his wrist instead of his hand. How to hold a bottle at the right angle so the baby doesn't swallow air. How to recognize the difference between a hungry cry and a tired one and an overstimulated one. Ye-jun, a man used to being the expert in every room he enters, becomes, for the first time in years, a clumsy beginner, and he lets her see it. Slowly, the mansion begins to change. The baby smiles for the first time on a Tuesday morning, gumming at Patricia's finger, while Ye-jun watches from the doorway, and something about the sound of his son's first real laugh breaks something loose in his chest that has been locked since the funeral. The staff notice the shift before they're willing to admit it. Madame Han watches Patricia bathe the baby with practiced, gentle hands, and, without meaning to, softens just slightly at the sight. The younger maids start greeting her in the mornings. Small things, nothing dramatic. Just the slow erosion of suspicion into something closer to acceptance. There are quiet moments neither of them mention out loud. One evening, exhausted from a double shift of soothing the baby through a fever, Patricia falls asleep sitting on the nursery floor, back against the crib. Ye-jun finds her there past midnight and, after a long hesitation, carries her to her room himself, moving as quietly as a man his size can manage. She wakes the next morning in her own bed, with no memory of how she got there, and when she asks the housekeeper, Madame Han only shrugs and says nothing, though the faint smile on her face says everything. Another night, Patricia cooks a dish from home, something her mother used to make, filling the kitchen with unfamiliar spices that send the household staff into confused whispers. Ye-jun, drawn by the smell, appears in the kitchen doorway, pretending to be looking for something else entirely. He eats 2 full servings and says only, "It's decent," but he finishes every bite and comes back for more, the following week, without being asked. The first time the whole mansion hears Patricia laugh, really laugh, head thrown back, unguarded, is the first time laughter has echoed through those halls since Ye-jun's wife passed away. Even the guards posted outside the estate exchange a glance at the sound, unfamiliar and welcome in equal measure. Somewhere in the quiet accumulation of these small moments, the staff stop calling her the foreign nurse and start calling her madam instead. Nobody decides this officially. It simply happens, the way water finds the lowest point without anyone directing it there. Patricia notices the shift and almost corrects them the first time she hears it. She opens her mouth to say she isn't anyone's wife, isn't anyone's madam, is simply an employee doing a job. But she doesn't correct them. Neither does Ye-jun, who hears it too, and says nothing at all. There are other moments, smaller ones, that neither of them ever mentions to anyone else. The evening Ye-jun comes home from a tense meeting with rival territory leaders, jaw tight, shoulders rigid, with a violence he's clearly holding back by sheer will, and finds Patricia in the nursery reading to the baby in a soft, unhurried voice. He stands in the doorway for a full 5 minutes, just listening, and by the time she notices him there, something in his posture has loosened that no amount of whiskey ever manages to loosen on its own. The afternoon Patricia catches him practicing, alone in the nursery, how to swaddle the baby the way she taught him, muttering instructions to himself under his breath, like a man rehearsing lines for a play. She doesn't let him know she saw. She simply walks in a few minutes later and praises the wrap job, as if she's seeing it for the first time, and the small, surprised pride on his face is something she thinks about more than she'd ever admit. The night the baby spikes a fever, and Ye-jun, usually so composed even in the middle of business disputes that end in bloodshed, paces the nursery floor with a terror in his eyes Patricia has never seen from him before. She takes charge instantly, cool cloths, careful monitoring, a steady voice reassuring him it's a common infant fever, and not the catastrophe his face suggests he's imagining. He doesn't leave the room until morning, and when the fever finally breaks, he exhales like a man who has just been pulled back from a ledge. "You were scared," she says gently, watching him. "I've negotiated with men who'd shoot me for looking at them wrong," he admits, voice hoarse from the sleepless night. "None of that ever scared me the way tonight did." She doesn't say anything to that. She doesn't need to. The look that passes between them says enough for both of them, lingering a beat longer than either of them intends to allow. The kind of silence that says far more than either is ready to admit out loud. 2 years pass the way sand moves through an hourglass, slowly at first, then all at once. The mansion that once echoed with silence now hums with the small, chaotic noise of a toddler learning to run before he's fully learned to walk. Ye-jun's son, now a sturdy, bright-eyed boy, with his mother's dimples and his father's serious gaze, has become the center of gravity around which the entire household orbits. He calls Madame Han Halmoni without anyone teaching him to, wobbles after the guard dogs in the garden, and has developed a habit of narrating everything he sees in a mix of Korean and the English phrases Patricia has taught him. He calls her Mama. The first time it happens, Patricia is in the middle of tying his shoelaces before a walk in the garden, only half listening, as he babbles about a butterfly he saw that morning. "Mama, look," he says, pointing at nothing in particular, and she freezes, her fingers going still on the laces. "I'm not your mother," she says gently, kneeling to meet his eyes. She's said this before, softly, over the months, whenever the word slips out. It never seems to fully land. The boy tilts his head, considering this with the particular seriousness only small children manage to bring to enormous questions. "Then why do you love me like one?" Patricia has no answer for that. She simply pulls him into a hug, blinking hard, and holds him a little longer than the moment strictly requires. Ye-jun, standing in the doorway with his tie loosened after a long day, has heard the entire exchange. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. He simply watches the two of them in the afternoon light, and for the first time, he allows himself to think the thought he's been avoiding for months, that somewhere between the sleepless nights and the lullabies, and the quiet dinners after the boy has gone to bed, he has fallen in love with the woman who saved his son. He decides that night that he will tell her. He rehearses it in his study with a glass of untouched whiskey in front of him, discarding sentence after sentence as either too formal or too clumsy for a man who has never once struggled to find the right words in any negotiation in his life. Every version sounds wrong. Every version feels too small for what he actually means. He decides he'll tell her tomorrow, over breakfast, before the boy wakes up, when it's just the two of them and the quiet kitchen light. But tomorrow doesn't come the way he plans it. His phone rings at 2 a.m., the specific ringtone reserved for only the organization's inner circle. He answers without hesitation, already sitting up, already reaching for the shirt draped over his chair. The voice on the other end is clipped, urgent. There's an operation being run by a rival faction, a shipment moving through the port that threatens to destabilize 3 years of careful territorial balance. The organization needs him there personally, not his lieutenants. Him. He finds Patricia already awake in the hallway, wrapped in a robe, drawn by the sound of his hurried footsteps. She takes one look at his face and knows immediately. "Don't go," she says quietly, gripping his arm. "Please, I don't know why, but something feels wrong. I have a bad feeling about this one." He wants to stay. He wants, more than anything, to sit down at that kitchen table and finally say the words he'd rehearsed all evening. But the organization doesn't wait for feelings, and men like him don't get the luxury of bad feelings changing plans that have already been set in motion by people above him. He cups her face gently, the first time he's ever touched her that way, and for a moment neither of them says anything at all. "I'll be home tomorrow," he says finally. He walks to the nursery first, presses a kiss to his sleeping son's forehead, lingers there a moment longer than necessary, and then he's gone, his car disappearing down the long gravel driveway into the dark. Patricia stands at the window long after the taillights vanish, arms wrapped around herself, the bad feeling in her chest refusing to quiet no matter how many times she tells herself she's overreacting. She has no way of knowing yet that she is right. The operation is a trap. What was supposed to be a straightforward interception turns into an ambush the moment Yi Jun's convoy reaches the port. Gunfire erupts from positions his intelligence team swore were empty. Vehicles explode in the dark, throwing orange light across the water. His closest men who have stood beside him for a decade, men who were at his wedding, men who held his son the day he was born, fall one after another in the chaos, and by the time the smoke begins to clear, there is nothing left standing where his convoy used to be. By morning, the news channels have the story running on repeat. Korean Mafia boss Yi Jun, killed in port ambush. The details trickle out over the following hours, in the fragmented way tragedy always seems to. Unconfirmed reports of a firefight lasting nearly 20 minutes. A warehouse fire that burned through the night, visible from 3 kilometers away. A body count still being finalized. Reporters camp outside the mansion gates within hours. Cameras trained on a house that has nothing to say to any of them. Inside, the phones don't stop ringing. Business partners offering condolences that sound more like positioning statements. Rival factions testing the waters to see how quickly the territory might destabilize. A lawyer Patricia has never met, calling repeatedly, insisting he needs to speak with whoever is currently managing the estate. She lets every call go to voicemail. None of it feels real enough yet to answer. The mansion goes silent in a way it hasn't been silent since the day his wife died. Madame Han turns off the television with shaking hands. The younger staff cry openly in the hallways. And Patricia, who has spent 2 years building an entire life inside these walls around a man she was never supposed to fall for, collapses onto the kitchen floor, a sound tearing out of her chest that doesn't sound like grief for an employer. Because it isn't. She cries harder than anyone in that house, harder than the staff who served him for a decade, harder than the guards who would have taken a bullet for him without a second thought. She cries the way a person cries when the one thing they never let themselves fully admit they needed has been ripped away before they ever got the chance to say it out loud. The boy, barely 2, doesn't fully understand what's happened. He only knows his father hasn't come home, and he keeps asking Patricia when Appa will be back, and every time she has to swallow the answer, she doesn't have the strength to give him. 3 days later, before the funeral arrangements are even finalized, a car pulls into the driveway that Patricia doesn't recognize. Ye Jun's younger brother steps out. He is not dressed for mourning. His suit is sharp, his expression sharper, and the first words out of his mouth to Madame Han are not condolences. Where are the estate documents? Whose side are you on so far? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The brother's name is Min Ho, and Patricia has met him only twice before. Once at a family dinner where he barely acknowledged her existence, and once at the child's first birthday, where he spent the entire evening on his phone in the corner of the garden. She has never trusted him, and the way he walks through the mansion now, hands in his pockets, eyes cataloging the furniture and the paintings like a man doing inventory, rather than mourning his brother, tells her everything she needs to know. I asked for the estate documents, he repeats to Madame Han, who stands frozen at the base of the staircase. Sir, your brother has only just... My brother is dead. His voice is flat, businesslike, the voice of a man who has already moved past grief into calculation, which makes me the eldest surviving male in this family, which makes this estate mine to manage until the courts finalize things. I'd like the documents, now. Patricia steps forward before she can stop herself. There's a child, she says. Your brother's son. He's the rightful heir. Min Ho looks at her properly for the first time, and something cold flickers behind his eyes. The child, he says slowly, was born to a woman who died in childbirth, to a father who is no longer here to claim him. Legally, that boy's status is far less settled than you seem to think. He lets that sit in the air for a moment, watching her reaction carefully. I'd be careful, if I were you, about what you assume is yours to protect. Within a week, Min Ho has moved into the master suite, redecorating it before the sheets on the old bed have even been changed. Within 2, he has begun dismissing staff one by one, starting with the ones most loyal to Ye-jun, the ones who might ask uncomfortable questions about a child's inheritance. Madame Han is let go with a severance check and no explanation, though she pulls Patricia aside on her final morning, presses a folded piece of paper into her hand with her sister's address written on it, and whispers, "If you ever need somewhere to go, you go there first." Patricia never forgets the gesture, even years later. The guards who served Ye-jun for a decade are replaced with men Patricia has never seen before, men whose eyes follow her a little too closely whenever she carries the boy through the halls, men who report her movements to Min Ho with a diligence that makes her skin crawl. Business associates who once bowed respectfully to Ye-jun now bow, just as easily, to his brother, their loyalty apparently transferable to whoever happens to be signing the checks. Patricia watches an entire empire quietly rearrange its allegiance within a month, and understands, with a clarity that frightens her, exactly how replaceable even a dead king can become. Then comes the afternoon Min Ho corners her in the nursery, arms crossed, voice deceptively pleasant. "I've spoken to the family lawyers," he says. "Given the boy's mother is deceased and his father tragically gone, and given there's no formal adoption or legal guardianship on record for you, I think it's best the child goes somewhere more appropriate. There's a well-regarded children's home 2 hours outside the city. I've already made arrangements." Patricia's blood goes cold. "You're not taking him anywhere." "I wasn't asking." Min Ho's smile doesn't reach his eyes. "You have 3 days to prepare him. After that, arrangements have already been made, regardless of your feelings on the matter." Patricia nods slowly, forces her voice to stay even. Understood. She has no intention of understanding anything of the sort. That night, after the new guards do their rounds and settle into the predictable rhythm Min Ho hasn't bothered to vary, Patricia packs a single bag. She's been quietly saving money since the day she arrived at the mansion, tucking away a portion of every payment Ye-jun insisted on giving her beyond her original debt, never quite sure why some instinct told her to keep it separate, accessible, ready. She tells herself now, it was simply good sense. She doesn't examine too closely whether some part of her always feared a day like this might come. She wakes the boy gently at 3 in the morning, dresses him in warm clothes, and carries him out through the old servant's entrance at the back of the property. The one Min Ho's new security detail hasn't bothered to fully map yet, because they assume, wrongly, that a former hospital nurse poses no threat worth studying. By the time the sun rises over Seoul, Patricia and the boy are 3 hours away on a bus heading toward the coast, and the mansion behind them no longer has any claim over either of their lives. Min-ho doesn't report her disappearance to the police. A missing nanny and a child whose custody was never fully settled is not a story he wants attracting attention, not while he's still consolidating control over an empire that technically belongs to someone else. He sends a handful of men to look, half-heartedly, for a few weeks. Then, when nothing turns up, he lets the matter quietly die, more interested in the empire in front of him than the loose ends behind him. Patricia and the boy settle 200 kilometers away, in a modest coastal town where no one recognizes either of their faces. She takes a job at a small local clinic, modest pay, long hours. Nothing like the life she left behind in that mansion. She rents a small apartment above a bakery, the kind of place where the walls are thin and the heating is unreliable, but where no one asks questions about who she is or where the boy's father might be. 5 years pass this way. The boy, now 7, has grown into a quiet, thoughtful child, gentle with the neighborhood cats, sharp with his schoolwork, utterly unaware of the empire that was once meant to be his. Patricia has told him only that his father died before he could really know him, a version of the truth simple enough for a child to hold without breaking under its weight. He doesn't ask many questions about it anymore. He has, in the uncomplicated way of children, simply accepted the shape of the life he's been given. Patricia has built something quiet and stable out of the wreckage of everything that came before. She still thinks of Yi-jun sometimes, late at night, in the particular quiet of an apartment that's only ever really hers and her son's, because that's what she calls him now, in the privacy of her own mind, even if she's never once let herself say the word son out loud in front of him. She thinks about the words she never got to say. She thinks about the words she never got to say. She thinks about the words she never got to say. She has made her peace with the fact that some things simply don't get to finish the way you plan them. Their life together now is small in a way that once would have seemed unthinkable. Mornings start with instant coffee, and the boy's endless questions over breakfast. Why the tide comes in, why cats sleep so much, why he can't skip school to go fishing with the neighbor's son. She works long shifts at the clinic, coming home smelling faintly of antiseptic, and he does his homework at the kitchen table under the flickering overhead light because the desk lamp broke last winter, and she hasn't gotten around to replacing it. On weekends, they walk to the pier and watch the fishing boats come in, and sometimes, without meaning to, Patricia finds herself scanning the crowd for a face she knows she won't find, an old habit she can't quite train herself out of. The boy has grown into someone gentle and watchful, quicker to notice a stray cat needing food than to notice his own hunger, the kind of child who apologizes to furniture when he bumps into it. Sometimes she looks at him and sees flashes of a man she buried in her memory 5 years ago, the same serious eyes, the same way of going quiet before he says something important. She has never told him the full truth about who his father was, only the parts a child can carry without the weight crushing him. Some nights, tucking him into a bed that's slightly too small for how fast he's grown, she wonders if she made the right choice keeping the rest hidden, or if she simply postponed a reckoning that was always going to come due eventually. She doesn't know yet how soon that reckoning is arriving. Then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, as she's walking the boy home from school past the bakery downstairs, 2 strangers are waiting outside her building. A woman in a sharp gray coat, and beside her, an American man in a suit that doesn't belong in this small coastal town at all. They stand too still, too composed, the way people stand when they've been trained to look unremarkable and have simply never quite managed it. Patricia's grip tightens on the boy's hand before either stranger has said a single word, some old instinct recognizing danger before her conscious mind catches up. They introduce themselves with names that mean nothing to her, and then the woman says 4 words that stop Patricia cold in the middle of the street. Code green has been activated. Patricia doesn't move. The boy tugs at her hand, confused by the strangers blocking their path, but she keeps her eyes fixed on the woman in the gray coat. I don't know what that means, Patricia says carefully, angling her body slightly in front of the boy, an old instinct from years of protecting him that has never fully switched off. We didn't expect you would, the American man says, his voice calm, practiced, the voice of someone used to delivering difficult information without alarming the people receiving it. My name is Daniel Cho. This is my colleague, GA. We worked with Yi Jun. The name lands like a stone dropped into still water. Patricia hasn't heard anyone say it out loud in 5 years. He's dead, she says flatly. That's the story that was allowed to exist, GIA says, for a very good reason, but we're not here to explain everything on a street corner. We're here because a contingency plan he put in place years ago has just been triggered, and it concerns your son directly. He's not. Patricia stops herself, the old reflex catching in her throat before the boy's confused eyes make her abandon the correction entirely. What contingency plan? Daniel glances briefly at the boy, then back at Patricia. Yi Jun anticipated, long before the ambush, that something might happen to him. He built protections into his estate specifically to ensure that if he ever disappeared, his son would still be recognized as the sole legal heir, regardless of what his brother tried to claim. Those protections have just been triggered by a court filing his brother made this week, trying to finalize permanent ownership of the estate. Which means, GI continues, Min-ho now knows, officially, that the boy is still alive and still legally the true heir. Which means he also knows the boy is now the single biggest threat to everything he's built over the last 5 years. Patricia's grip on the boy's hand tightens without her fully realizing it. You're telling me he's coming after my son? Neither of them corrects the word my. We're telling you, Daniel says gently, that you need to let us help you. Immediately. Patricia studies the two of them for a long moment, taking in the calm, practiced way they stand, the way their eyes sweep the street behind her without ever seeming to move. Who exactly are you? She finally asks. Not names. What are you to him? GIA hesitates, glancing at Daniel before answering. People Yi Jun trusted with the one thing he couldn't trust to anyone inside his own organization, she says. We were never part of the syndicate. We're the outside insurance he built in case the syndicate ever turned on him, which, as it turns out, it did. He knew this could happen. Patricia's voice is barely above a whisper, even before the ambush. He already knew. Men like him always know, Daniel says. The only question was ever whether it would happen sooner or later. He made sure that whichever way it went, his son wouldn't be left without protection. What do you think happens next? Drop your prediction in the comments below. Patricia refuses at first. 5 years of careful anonymity, of a small rented apartment and a quiet clinic job, have taught her not to trust anyone who arrives with urgent warnings and unfamiliar faces. But 3 days later, when a car she doesn't recognize idles outside the bakery for 4 consecutive mornings, and when the boy's teacher mentions offhand that a man asked strange questions about his family at the school gates, Patricia understands that the danger Daniel and GI warned her about is not hypothetical. The legal battle moves fast and dies faster. Min-ho's lawyers, backed by 5 years of consolidated power and bribed judges across 3 jurisdictions, bury every filing meant to establish the boy's claim. Evidence goes missing. A key witness, who could confirm the boy's identity, is suddenly unreachable. A judge sympathetic to the case is quietly reassigned to a provincial court overnight. Patricia watches, helpless, as an entire legal system built on paper and precedent proves utterly powerless against a man with enough money to make truth itself negotiable. Patricia sits through 2 of the hearings herself, tucked into the back row of a courtroom that feels colder and more indifferent with every passing minute. She watches Min-ho's lawyers, sharp-suited and unbothered, dismantle every piece of evidence Daniel and GA's team presents, with the calm efficiency of men who have done this before and expect to keep doing it. She watches a judge who seemed sympathetic during the first hearing suddenly grow distant and clipped during the second, refusing to meet anyone's eyes, and she understands, without needing to be told, exactly what has happened to change his posture. This isn't going to work through the courts, she tells GA quietly after the second hearing collapses. Is it? GA doesn't answer right away, which is its own kind of answer. Min-ho has spent 5 years building protections around himself, precisely so that no court could ever touch him, she finally says. We knew this was a possibility going in. We just hoped it wouldn't come to this. To what? GI's silence stretches a beat too long before she speaks again. To him deciding the courtroom isn't worth the risk anymore. Patricia doesn't sleep that night, or many nights after. She keeps the boy closer than usual, walks him all the way to his classroom door instead of leaving him at the gate, checks the street outside their building before letting him step onto it. She tells herself she's being paranoid. She tells herself the same thing 3 separate times over the following week, each time a little less convincingly than the last. She starts noticing things she used to dismiss without a second thought. A parked car that stays too long outside the clinic. A stranger at the bakery counter who orders coffee but never seems to drink it. She mentions none of it to the boy, keeping her voice light and unbothered every time he asks why they're taking the long way home instead of the short one. He's too young to understand the weight she's carrying, and she intends to keep it that way for as long as she possibly can. When the courts fail, Min-ho stops pretending to wait for them. Patricia has known, on some level, that this day might come since the moment she carried the boy out of that mansion 5 years ago. What she hasn't known is how prepared she would need to be. But some instinct, some quiet paranoia she's never fully questioned, led her to map every exit of the small apartment the day they moved in. A loose panel in the back of the closet leads to a narrow service stairwell. A window in the boy's room opens onto the bakery's flat roof, which connects to an alley 2 buildings down. She has never told him why she made him practice the route so many times, treating it like a game, timing him with a stopwatch and pretending it was fun. Now she is grateful she did. She had also, months earlier, tucked a small emergency bag behind a loose floorboard beneath his bed, a change of clothes, cash in small bills, a photocopy of both their identification papers, a folded note with GAA's number, memorized so thoroughly Patricia could recite it in her sleep. She told herself at the time it was simple caution, the same instinct that made her keep a portion of her mansion salary separate all those years ago. She never let herself examine too closely why that particular instinct had never fully gone quiet, even in 5 years of nothing happening. The night the men come, she hears the stairwell door downstairs give way before the boy does. She doesn't hesitate. She wakes him, presses their emergency bag into his hands, and guides him through the closet panel with hands that don't shake, even though her heart is a war drum in her chest. "Run the route," she whispers. "Exactly like we practiced. Don't stop. Don't look back. GA will be waiting at the bakery. Mama, come with me. I'll be right behind you." She lies, because the men are already on the stairs, and there is no version of this where both of them make it out through the same narrow window in time. "Go, now." He goes, because he trusts her more than he's ever trusted anyone, and because some part of him, even at 7 years old, understands that this is not a moment to argue. Patricia turns to face the door as it splinters open. She fights harder than she ever imagined herself capable of, years of quiet strength and desperate love converging into something fierce and unrecognizable even to herself. She buys every second she can, knocking one man into the kitchen counter, driving her elbow into another's throat, anything to stretch the window of time the boy needs to disappear across that rooftop. One man grabs a fistful of her hair and slams her against the wall hard enough to rattle a framed photo loose from its hook. She retaliates on instinct, driving her knee up, twisting free just long enough to buy another few seconds. Another few seconds. Every fragment of time a small victory, measured only in whether the boy has reached the alley yet. But there are too many of them, and eventually her back is against the wall, and a gun is raised level with her chest, and there is nothing left to fight with. She closes her eyes. She thinks of the boy's laugh, of a lullaby in a hospital room 5 years ago, of a man who once said, quietly, in the dark of a nursery, that she was good at this. She accepts, in that final second, that this might be where her story ends. Then the world explodes into gunfire that isn't hers. The gunfire is deafening, close, and impossibly fast. 3 shots, then 2 more, then silence so sudden it feels like its own kind of violence. Patricia opens her eyes. The men who had her cornered are on the floor. Smoke curls through the shattered doorway, thick and acrid, catching the hallway light in slow, drifting ribbons. For a moment, she can't process what she's seeing, can't understand how the room went from certain death to complete stillness in the space of a single breath. Then a figure steps through the smoke. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with a controlled, deliberate calm that doesn't match the chaos he just walked through. He lowers the weapon in his hand, and with his other hand, reaches up and pulls away the black mask covering the lower half of his face. Patricia's knees nearly give out beneath her. It's Ye-jun. Older, somehow. A thin scar cutting through one eyebrow that wasn't there 5 years ago. His eyes find hers across the wreckage of the apartment, and for a long moment neither of them says a single word, because there are no words built for a moment like this one. Then Patricia crosses the room, and before he can say anything at all, her hand connects with his face, hard, the sound of it sharper than the gunfire that came before it. Do you know how many nights your son cried for you? Her voice breaks on the word son, 5 years of restraint finally giving way all at once. Do you know how many birthdays I had to explain away? Do you know what you did to us? Ye-jun doesn't flinch. He doesn't raise a hand to his stinging cheek. He simply stands there and absorbs every word, like a man who has spent 5 years rehearsing exactly how much he deserves this, and more. I missed every one of them too, he says quietly. Every birthday, every night he cried. I know the exact number, Patricia, because I counted every single one. Then why? Her voice cracks entirely now. Why did you let us believe you were dead? He exhales slowly, the weight of 5 years pressing into every word. The ambush wasn't random. It came from inside the organization, men who wanted my territory and were willing to burn my entire convoy to get it. If I had walked away from that port alive and gone public, they would have finished the job properly the second time, and they would have taken everyone I loved down with me to make sure of it. You, our son, everyone. So you just... I let them believe I died, he continues, because it was the only way to dismantle the operation from the inside, without anyone realizing I was the one doing it. 5 years, Patricia. 5 years of hunting down every single person responsible for that ambush, one by one, quietly, so that when it was finally over, there would be nothing left for them to come back for. You could have told me. If I had told you, he says, voice breaking for the first time, you would have had to carry that secret every single day, and one slip, one wrong look at the wrong moment, would have gotten you both killed. I couldn't put that on you. I couldn't put that on him. He looks toward the window where the boy disappeared minutes earlier. I watched Patricia. From a distance, every year I could manage it, I found ways to see him. His first day of school, his 7th birthday, from across the street, where he couldn't see me. I was never as far away as you thought. Patricia stares at him, anger and heartbreak and 5 years of grief, tangled together into something she doesn't have a name for. And now? Patricia shakes her head slowly, the anger in her draining into something heavier, something closer to grief, for the years neither of them will ever get back. I built a whole life believing you were gone, she says quietly. I taught myself not to think about you. I taught him you loved him, even though he'd never remember you. Do you know what that takes? Do you know what it costs to keep loving someone who isn't supposed to exist anymore? I know exactly what it costs, Ye-jun says, and for the first time, his composure cracks entirely, his voice raw in a way 5 years of careful discipline could never fully train out of him. Because I did the same thing, standing across a street from a school gate, watching my son grow up through a car window, never once allowed to say his name out loud in front of anyone who might report it. You think this was easy for me. You think I chose this because it was simple. Then why? Because the alternative was burying both of you for real, he says. Not a story on the news, not a name people whisper about at galas. An actual grave, Patricia. That's what waiting for me would have cost you, if I'd made even one mistake. And now? Now the threat is gone, he says simply. Min-ho. The men who orchestrated the ambush, all of it. Finished, permanently, as of tonight. I'm not here to reclaim an empire. I never wanted it in the first place. I'm here, he says, voice finally breaking completely. Because I want my family back, if you'll still have me. For a long moment, Patricia says nothing at all. Then, from the rooftop above, a small, uncertain voice calls down through the broken window. Mama, is it safe? Patricia looks at Ye-jun, then toward the window, then back at Ye-jun once more. Come down, she calls back, her voice thick with tears. She's no longer trying to hold back. There's someone here who's been waiting a very long time to meet you properly. The boy climbs back down through the window minutes later, confused and cautious, until his eyes land on the tall stranger standing beside Patricia in the wreckage of their apartment. He doesn't recognize the man's face. He recognizes something else instead, some old, buried instinct from a life he was too young to remember consciously, something that makes him stop in the doorway and simply stare. Yi-jun kneels slowly, bringing himself down to the boy's eye level, the way Patricia taught him to do all those years ago. In a nursery neither of them ever expected to matter this much. "Hello," he says softly, his voice unsteady in a way it has never once been in front of another living soul. "I'm your father. I know that's a strange thing to hear from a stranger, but I've been trying to get back to you for a very long time." The boy looks between the two adults in front of him, taking in Patricia's tear-streaked face, the unfamiliar warmth in it he's never quite seen directed at anyone else this way. Then, slowly, he steps forward and wraps his small arms around Ye-jun's neck. Ye-jun closes his eyes at the contact, his hands hovering for a moment before finally settling against his son's small back, holding him the way he imagined holding him 1,000 times from whatever rooftop or rented car he was watching from over the years. Patricia watches the two of them, tears finally spilling freely down her face, and for the first time in 5 years, she lets herself feel something other than survival, something dangerously close to hope. "I have so many questions," the boy mumbles into Yi-jun's shoulder, muffled and small. "I have 5 years of answers," Yi-jun says quietly. "I'll give you every single one of them, for as long as you want to hear them." Later, once the wreckage of the apartment has been cleared, and a quiet convoy of Daniel and GA's people have secured the building, the three of them sit together on the small balcony overlooking the bakery's back alley, the same alley the boy sprinted through only an hour earlier. Patricia holds a cup of tea she isn't drinking. Yi-jun holds his son's hand like he's afraid letting go might undo everything that just happened. Nobody speaks for a long while. Nobody needs to. Below them, the bakery owner sweeps broken glass off the sidewalk, muttering about the noise from the night before, entirely unaware of what almost happened 2 floors above his ovens. Life in the small coastal town continues exactly as it always has, indifferent, ordinary, blessedly unremarkable, and for the first time in 5 years, Patricia lets herself imagine what an ordinary future might actually look like with both of them in it. "What happens now?" she asks quietly, not looking at him. "Now," Ye-jun says, "we figure out what kind of life the three of us actually want. Not the one the syndicate wanted for me, not the one Min-ho tried to take from him, something we choose ourselves, for the first time. No empire. No empire," he agrees. "Just this, if you'll let me be part of it." Patricia finally looks at him, really looks at him, the scar above his eyebrow, the 5 years of exhaustion still written into the lines of his face, the same steady patience she first saw in a hospital room the night everything began. She doesn't answer him with words. She simply reaches over and takes his free hand, and lets that be the answer instead. The boy, already half asleep between them, mumbles something about wanting pancakes in the morning, and for the first time in longer than any of them can remember, all three of them laugh at the same time, quietly, easily, like a family that was always meant to find its way back to each other. Outside, the city of Seoul continues on exactly as it always has, indifferent to the quiet reunion happening in a modest apartment above a bakery, 200 kilometers from the empire that once defined all their lives. There is no mansion waiting for them, no throne, no territory, no title to reclaim. There is only the three of them, standing together in the wreckage of everything that tried to keep them apart, finally given the one thing none of them ever stopped hoping for: a chance to simply be a family. If you were in Patricia's shoes, would you have forgiven him or walked away? Let me know in the comments, and if this story had you holding your breath, make sure you're subscribed to Afro-K Stories with B, because part 2 might just be closer than you think.